Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is May and this year I read 42 books. Yes, I did it. It's very exciting. I'm really proud of myself. But I'm also really lucky because I had a lot of time to read. I also read a lot of short books, so I don't know how impressive that number really is. It's not really about the fact that it's 42 that's super satisfying to me as much as it is about the fact that I just had a fantastic reading year. Like I genuinely loved most of the books that I read this year, and so that's why this video is so hard to film. I filmed it several times already, and every single time it just ends up being way too long, and so I'm just gonna try to condense all that information into what were actually my favorite books. Of 42 books, 15 poetry collections, 15 nonfiction books, and 12 fiction books, which were my favorites? Which books left an impression? So before I begin, I just wanted to make some honorable mentions because there are books that I started and I didn't finish. There are books that were really good, but they just didn't make the really top tier of books. And there are books that don't really count as books that I'd also just like to share with you. So let's just really quickly begin with those. The first book that I wish I had finished, and if I had, I'm sure it would have ended up in my top list, is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. This is a science of sleep nonfiction account of everything that this doctor knows about sleep, and it's super interesting, and there's a lot of stuff I learned and then for some reason had to put it down, but I especially enjoyed the parts about animals and the different ways that they sleep, such as like dolphins and whales sleeping with half their brain, which I thought that was really cool. So Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, definitely an honorable mention. Another book that isn't really a book, and so I can't really, put it in my top list, is this. It's Calm the Mind, Change the World. It's basically the accompaniment to the Calm meditation app, and it's a bunch of little prompts and beautiful activities and quotes and tips and tricks to how to stay calm. I read this over the course of a week, every day before bed, and I had absolutely the best week of the year probably. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I think it's a wonderful gift if you're looking to get somebody a birthday gift or something. This would be one. A book that I found in just a local bookshop in Paris when I was visiting. This was the first thing that I bought when I was in Paris, and it's absolutely like one of my favorite books now. But again, it's not really a book, it's more of a portfolio of photography accompanied by quotations, and it's called Contemplation by Matthew Ricard and Simon Velez. And basically this photographer travels around mainly Tibet, I think, and takes these gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous pictures of nature and different festivals and different kind of just scenes in Tibet, and his friend, I guess, or collaborator, quotes different teachers and guides, and it's basically a book to contemplate, a book to have a mindful experience with, and I really enjoyed also reading this one before bed, so would recommend. And finally, a few books that didn't quite make my top books of the year, but I did really enjoy. This one, Victims of a Map, a bilingual anthology of Arabic poetry, I read like 75% of, and then never finished, but the books in here are really great. The translations are really great. Really recommend them. They collect poems from Adonis, Mahmoud Darwish, and Samih al-Qasim, and I read Adonis and Mahmoud Darwish's poems, and I didn't quite love Samih al-Qasim, and so I never finished it, but really loved this one. Also really enjoyed The Wind Among the Reeds by William Butler Yeats. This is a really bad publication. I don't even think it is a publishing house. I think it's just somebody printed this off. I really don't recommend reading this publication, but you can find the poetry collection online. W.B. Yeats is an Irish poet, and The Wind Among the Reeds is kind of a collection of love/nature poetry, and I really enjoyed it. Would recommend. And also two more poetry collections that again didn't quite make my top list are Rapture by Carol Ann Duffy, which I've spoken a lot about this year. This is a book of love poems, and Carol Ann Duffy is the winner of the 2005 T.S. Eliot Prize, and it it makes so much sense because her imagery and the way that she constructs her poems are very reminiscent of T.S. Eliot, who is one of my favorite poets, and I really, really adore this collection. And finally, of the honorable mentions, I've gotta mention it. Mary Oliver's book, Devotions. This is a huge tome of an anthology of her work. It collects poems from every single poetry collection she's ever published, and it just takes you on this chronicle backwards in time, starting from her final poetry collection and ending with her first. And I think it's just such a beautiful journey that you take with her as she, learns and makes mistakes and discovers herself and discovers the world and discovers a love for the world. It's such a mindful and beautiful experience reading this one. And yeah, I just had to mention it in this video. So those were the kind of honorable mentions, and now we can get on to what were my actual favorite books of 2019. I had, like I said, such an awesome reading year. Every single book that I picked up, with the exception of a couple, I just adored. And so, I just have to say it. I read the second, third, and fourth book of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy this year. I read Restaurant at the End of the Universe, Life, the Universe, and Everything, and So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. And all of these books were just fantastic, like exactly how I expected to enjoy them. They are, 3 of my favorite books of all time, and I'm really glad I got to re-experience them this year. So there are those ones. I also loved Tales from Outer Suburbia by Shantan. I read this one twice this year, and I plan on reading it again before the end of the year. It's just such a fantastic book. It is a illustrated short story collection that takes place in this mythical land, Outer Suburbia, where things are similar but not quite right. It's definitely magical realism. It's got some really wacky stories, really, really heartwarming, an absolutely beautiful way to drift off into dreamland, a wonderful bedtime read, and a really, really great gift as well to give to anyone of any age. I really believe that anyone can enjoy this book, and everyone will. So there's that one. In the nonfiction category, I have 3 books that just really impacted me this year. The first of which was Wild, A Journey from Lost to Found by Cheryl Strayed. I had been meaning to read this book for a really long time, but I had never had my own copy. And then for the reading rush, which took place in July of 2019, I decided this would be the perfect time to read it. Cheryl Strayed had a really traumatizing period of her life that prompted her to go off on this journey to hike the Pacific Crest Trail in the US, which is like 2,000 miles. It's really, really long journey, and like it says, it's a journey from lost to found. She is completely lost in her own life and her personal life, and she takes this physical challenge to find herself and to find a reason to go on, and she does, and it's absolutely awesome. I think it's like such a worthy story to tell, and it makes me want to go on a pilgrimage, and makes me really thankful that I haven't experienced the traumas that have forced me to go on one like she has. So if you're interested in like hiking memoirs or kind of like wild adventures, I really recommend reading Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Another one of my favorite nonfiction books this year was Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear by Elizabeth Gilbert. Kind of late to the party on this one. There was a lot of hype around it a year or 2 ago, but I still really enjoyed it. This book totally incentivized me to, go on a creative journey to write my poetry collection, which will be coming out early 2020, expected around March or April. But yeah, it's all about the magic of leaning into your creativity and nurturing it and treating it like a companion rather than as something that you expect of yourself. I think it's really great to set up your mindset around creativity in a really healthy and nurturing way, and I think it definitely did that for me. There are also a lot of really great anecdotes and quirky little Elizabeth Gilbertian things about it that are really entertaining as well. So really easy to read, really inspiring, and definitely one of my favorites from this year. My absolute favorite nonfiction I read this year was Algorithms to Live By, The Computer Science of Human Decisions by Brian Christian and Tom Griffiths. this is just like the most informative book that I read this year. Like, it has so much information ranging from like psychology, behavioral economics, computer science, mathematics, like so much information. There's some historical anecdotes in here that are really interesting. I genuinely learned so much, and in fact I learned so much that it was like information overload to some extent, and I definitely have to go back and like remind myself of some of the main points. But this was absolutely my favorite book of this year, in terms of nonfiction information. Like, just read this book. And okay, now on to my favorite poems. Two of my favorite poetry collections of this year have to be, first of all, the Rumi poetry collection. I read it a couple of times this year. I kept going back to it, and it's just so insightful and it's so beautiful, and there's something in here for everybody, and I love it. I think Rumi is now officially one of my favorites. Mary Oliver initially was the one who inspired me to read more Rumi, because I could tell that she was very inspired by his style, and I would actually love to read an Arabic translation of the Farsi, because I think it would, illuminate some different linguistic elements of the poems. But yeah, just this collection is absolutely phenomenal. There's some essays in here as well that are just about his metaphysics and epistemology, which are super interesting, but mainly the love poems, mainly the poems about loss and grief and friendship. Just beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. Favorite poetry collection of the year, with the exception of this one, Morning Songs, Poems of Sorrow and Beauty. You may have seen it in my new poetry series where I read you a poem every single week. I've read you a couple of poems from here already, and yeah, this is just like literally the best collection that I've read all year. I've read 15 poetry collections, and this is it. Like, this is it. It's so well constructed. I think what I love most about it is that it collects all of these different styles of poetry and all of these different poems from all of these different poets, and the theme is really the central factor, but it's not the poet. And most of the poetry collections I've read this year, in fact every single other poetry collection I read this year, was following a very specific poet, and so there was a kind of a style that went along with it. But with this one, you really get a diversity of style, of form, of kind of imagery, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. And finally, my two favorite fiction books, possibly my two favorite books of the year, possibly, and I'm scared to say this online, because I know that I've set myself up so deeply as like Hitchhiker's Guide is my favorite series of all time, and it still is my favorite series, but these two books may have taken the seat of favorite books ever, because man, I wasn't expecting to love either of these books so much. I had literally never heard of either of them before I picked them up, but they are just okay. Let's just do it. Okay, so one that you guys may all be expecting at this point is The Humans by Matt Haig. This is not originally the copy that I read. Fun story, I literally bought not one, not two, but 3 copies of that paperback edition that I initially read, and I ended up giving them all out for people to read, because I just thought that they would really benefit from those books, this book specifically. But this was a gift from my dad, which is actually signed by Matt Haig, and it's like, in my opinion, it is a perfectly executed book. There's nothing about this book that I don't like. There's the plot is riveting and exciting and intriguing, and it carries the story throughout every single moment. There was not a dull moment reading this book. Every other line is hilarious, and then every other line is profound, and then you are crying and you are laughing and you are confused and you are grateful, and like it gives you all the emotions. In brief summary, it is a book about an alien who comes down to Earth on a mission to erase some pretty important information that these alien civilizations don't want humanity to have. And so in this process of executing his mission, he has to learn how to be a human, because he's literally never had a body, he's never had language, he's never really like lived as a human, and he's never experienced the wide range of experiences that humans experience. And so through his perspective, you really come to appreciate everything that there is to be about being human, and it is glorious. It is actually like one of my favorite books of all time, if not favorite book. I don't know, man. I don't know, because it's tied, in my opinion, it's absolutely tied between The Humans and The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, which is just as good, just as hilarious, just as insightful, slightly more satirical and like politically charged than The Humans. And so I really, really enjoyed it. And the way that I've interpreted this book is it's kind of like the predecessor to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The way that the jokes are told, the way that the plot is set up, the way that it moves from scene to scene and from chapter to chapter is just, it's just absolutely hilarious. In the back it says, "The Sirens of Titan is an outrageous romp through space, time, and morality. The richest, most depraved man on Earth, Malachi Constant, is offered a chance to take a space journey to distant worlds with a beautiful woman at his side. Of course, there's a catch to the invitation, and a prophetic vision about the purpose of human life that only Vonnegut has the courage to tell." Now that's a great blurb, but I think it slightly misses the point, which is that the universe is absolutely absurd, and that even though there's this absurdity and meaninglessness to existence, there is still ideology, and ideology is so central to the way that we function as humans. And so throughout the novel, there are so many plot points that where you're just like, this is so satirical, it hurts, but it also is so freeing, because I don't know, it's just awesome. Like, these two books have made my year so much better. Absolutely, both of them sci-fi comedy, of course, my favorite genre, but ultimately all of the books that I read this year I'm really grateful to have read, and I'm especially grateful to Matt Haig and to Kurt Vonnegut, and I've got to read way more Kurt Vonnegut this year. I mean, that's a big goal of mine for the upcoming year. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm sorry if it was a bit all over the place. I've literally filmed this video like 3 times, and every time I talk for way too long and I get super exhausted, and then I get really like start dreading the idea of editing the video. So I'm hoping I don't have to edit it that much. I hope that you pick up one of these books, or you let me know in the comments what books that you really enjoyed this year. I don't know if I'm gonna have any like explicit reading goals for the upcoming year. I kind of want to take it easy, read more in general, read more intuitively, and not care so much about the numerical goal. I mean, reading 42 books in 2019 was really satisfying. I think if I only read 20 books next year, I'll be happy. Mainly because I want to try to read longer books, and I want to spend more time with some of the books that I read. But in general, I just love reading, and I'm really excited to share more of my reading with you in the upcoming year. So yeah, let me know what you have loved reading this year and what you are maybe planning on reading next year. And I'll talk to you soon.